Hello and welcome to week 8 of history. The video. I'm sorry again. I forgot to, or not forgot. I couldn't find the time to do it last week. But anyway, hopefully we will bat 1,000 from this point on. And today, I actually, in my effort to appear cool and hip to you young guys, I'm wearing a shirt my kids got me from Puppet History. I don't know if any of y'all watch that on YouTube. It's starting to kind of fade on me here, but yeah, there's the professor. Anyway, 3 lessons this week. The last 2 are sort of related. The first one is sort of by itself, but interesting stuff this week. We're going to start with a person whose name you almost assuredly know, St. Patrick, the patron saint of Ireland. We probably know him best from St. Patrick's Day, wearing of the green. If you don't wear green, you get pinched. We put food coloring, green coloring into food and drink to turn it green on March 17th. As usual, the reason behind the commemoration is much like St. Valentine's Day. It's very much lost. There was a St. Valentine and there was a St. Patrick. He was born in England. And again, I'll throw up a quick map here to show you. The big island on the right is Great Britain, England at the bottom, Wales to the west, and Scotland to the north. The island to the west is Ireland, and even though it's very close to Great Britain, they developed very, very differently at this point in history. In the year 389, St. Patrick was born of Celtic descent on the big island, Great Britain, probably very close to the very middle of the island from what we know. He had Christian parents. Matter of fact, his father was a deacon in their church, but evidently Patrick was not an unruly kid, but one who didn't always listen to his parents. I know, color be shocked. Evidently he would much rather go play with his friends on the beach than go to church, much like most other teenagers. It was unfortunately during one of those beach outings that he was literally captured by pirates. Irish pirates. Yes, that is such a thing. Human trafficking has been around, unfortunately, as long as humans have been around. He was kidnapped and taken to Ireland and sold into slavery, and he served as a slave for 6 years. It was during this time that Patrick evidently had a chance to do an awful lot of soul searching, and he looked at his life and he began to pray. He began to pray to the God that his parents had prayed to. And he became a Christian. He began developing a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. 6 years after he was taken into captivity, Patrick managed to escape. He ran back to the beach and very fortunately found a ship that was going to England, took him on board, and he made his way back home. I can only imagine how wonderful a homecoming that was for his parents. Not knowing if he's dead or alive for 6 years. I'm sure they were not notified of what had happened to him. But also during that interim period, their son comes back a Christian. And what a joyous time that must have been. It's at this time that Patrick said he started having dreams of Irish children calling him back to Ireland to tell them more about Jesus. It would be very difficult for him to say, boy, that's the last place I want to go to. I was a slave there for 6 years. I escaped there. Why would I want to go back? But God evidently had in mind for Patrick to go mission to the island of Ireland. And at the time, Ireland was very much a pagan nation. It wasn't really a nation at all. It was a bunch of widely scattered tribes and warlords and landowners and military leaders, and no national structure per se. It was really the Wild West. And it was also very pagan. It was here that the Druids were born. They worshiped the sun, the moon, the stars, performed rituals, and really, here we are, Halloween weekend. A lot of the images and terms that we use for Halloween date back to Druidic custom. So you have a very disorganized island, say island's a big island, but island nonetheless, full of pagan worship, and there had been attempts by Christian missionaries to deliver the good news of Jesus to the island. All of them failed, and the most likely reason for their failure was The Irish customs, that is to say, the little things that the people of Ireland did that made them unique, were very foreign to the missionaries, and they simply could not speak their language, figuratively and metaphorically. Well, who better to minister to those people than a guy who lived there for 6 years, even if it was as a slave? Certainly Patrick was able to soak up the ins and outs of Irish culture, such as it was. And again, if you're going to successfully be a missionary for Christ, you have to meet people where they are, not just geographically, but you have to speak their language. You have to communicate to them through things and styles that they understand. When Jesus shared parables with the Jews, he was using terminology, agriculture, things that they understood. If he had tried to incorporate mountain climbing into some of his parables, they would not nearly have been effective as were the agricultural references that he often used. So yeah, to be a good missionary, you've got to speak the language of the people that you are missioning to, if that is such a thing. And who better to do it, again, than Patrick? He arrived in Ireland in the year 432, and as evidence of him speaking the language of the Irish, he used the shamrock, a very simple plant, not even a plant, is, we have shamrocks here, they're all over the place, it's grass. He used that to explain the very complicated concept of the Holy Trinity. He explained that if you took one of the leaves off a shamrock, it's not really a shamrock anymore, it's something else. It's less than whole. And so the shamrock became forever associated with St. Patrick and his work. And his work was formidable. Now, there was opposition. The opposition to Patrick came from the tribal chiefs, the war chiefs, warlords, what have you, and from the Druids. So he had the military/political leaders against him and the so-called religious spiritual leaders against him. Does that sound like somebody else you might know? Jesus was opposed by the political and military powers and the religious powers of his time. Giving the good news is not for sissies, and those who have the authority, who have the power, are at very best going to be suspicious of you. Patrick was seized on numerous occasions, put in jail, yada, yada, yada. We all know Paul had that happen to him, Peter had it happen to him. But he was successful. The saying goes that Patrick found Ireland all heathen and left it all Christian. Probably not that simple, but you get the idea. The guy was very effective. According to the best estimates that historians can make, did Patrick, at least 300 churches in Ireland and baptized about 20,000 people. He was so effective that legends began cropping up around him. That's when you know you're doing good, when the people start making up stories about you. And, I saw him, single-handedly slay a dragon with his right hand. Well, no, but he did a lot of good, an awful lot of good. He died in the year 461. His death date is commonly listed as March 17th, so that's why we celebrate St. Patrick's Day on March 17th. And he really, in addition to the people he baptized, the churches he started, all of this really, really changed the very culture of Ireland. Ireland, again, for centuries had been a wild pagan nation with just a whole steeping stew of spirituality. In the centuries after St. Patrick, Ireland developed some of the most effective churches, and some of the things that they did in the Irish churches. The Church of Ionia off the coast of Ireland wrote the Book of Kells, 800 A.D., I believe it was, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful Bible with illustrations and gold inlays. It was one of the finest works of art, really, during all the Dark Ages. This happened on an island that was pagan until St. Patrick came rolling through. So think about that next time you put on the green and start marking St. Patrick's Day. We are going to take quite a shift here as we go to the next lesson. We go from St. Patrick to Attila the Hun. The very name probably invokes images in your mind of a a bloodthirsty warrior on a horse, slaughtering all who dared oppose him. The very name Attila the Hun has weight even in our modern culture. Someone who is intransigent in their views, very militant, is sometimes called, "All right, Attila, what are you doing?" It's a name, again, because of legend, that has come to have its own even modern-day connotation here 1,500 years later. Attila the Hun was a real person, just in case you're wondering. He was really an incredible warrior king who was one of those who helped hasten the fall of the Roman Empire. And really, in terms of military accomplishments, and I'm an amateur student of military history, he's one of the best of all time. Certainly one of the most effective of all time. The Huns, as a people, are of really unknown origin. The best possible answer is that the Huns were simply the people that Attila collected over the years and formed what was known as the Golden Horde of Mongols. And they conquered, they captured, they ruled. In modern day society, thank goodness, military conquest is no longer seen as a socially acceptable means to obtain power, but for all of human history it was, and very few were better at it than Attila. The Huns, these people, were said to intentionally scar their children's faces so they can get them used to pain and discomfort and toughen them up. I'm glad that's a custom that we're no longer embracing with open arms. They were also said to be bow-legged because they spent all their time on horses. Now, using horse in military campaigns had happened for hundreds of years before Attila, but the legend goes that all of his 500,000 people had horses. This was a roving army, and they were evidently masterful on horseback in warfare. You can imagine the advantage that mounted soldiers have over foot soldiers. It's amazing. Again, I could get you into some real good military strategy discussions. Suffice to say that they were fierce and they were very effective. From the year 434 to 453, not even 20 years, Attila the Hun did all this that you see in the picture. He conquered an area much larger than the Roman Empire. Asia, Russia, Finland, Sweden, even down to southern Asia near India. Remember, India's golden age was going on here. Attila got very close to that. In 447, he began invading the Eastern Roman Empire. Remember, it was split, then Constantine came along and unified it. Well, not long after Constantine, they split again. To try to keep peace, the Emperor of the East, Theodosius II, agreed to pay Attila a tribute. Basically, a bribe. Look, here's some money. Don't attack us, okay? Like giving your lunch money over to a bully. 2,100 pounds of gold a year, we're told. And to Attila, he said, yeah, okay, sure. Morally speaking, that's a victory for him and a defeat for Rome. Yeah, they still kept their stuff, but it was humiliating for the Eastern Roman Empire. Well, Attila turned his sights to the Western Roman Empire. In the year 451, he even got some tribute money from the Emperor of the West and got a gift of land south of the Danube River. And it was from there that he made his foray into Gaul, modern-day France. Attila conquered them in short order, and his legend grew. He was one of those who, again, at the time of his work, had established such a reputation that just the mere mention of his name was enough to strike fear. He used that. He knew that fear was most of the battle, and he did nothing to dissuade these legends of his invulnerability. And much like you saw with the Eastern Roman Empire, he got people to surrender before he even drew his sword. Now, we have this image of him being a ruthless barbarian king, and yeah, he was to a certain degree, but let's measure him up against, say, Julius Caesar or some of the Roman emperors. I think he stacks up more or less on the same moral plane as them. Evidently, he was a decent ruler who treated his people well. To me, this is a plus. He did not live a king's lifestyle. Attila did not rule from a castle that was centrally located in his empire. He traveled with his army. He was there all the time. He had sort of like the tabernacle. He had his own little, tented castle, such as it was, that he carried with him. He was not ostentatious in dress. He is always regarded as someone wearing just very regular clothes. He evidently had sort of a disdain for the trappings of royalty. He was everyday dude otherwise. I can kind of respect that. We know that he was illiterate, but he was smart. Like I said, he knew battle strategy, obviously. He was a freaking genius militarily. Again, I could go off on some of his conquests, but he knew how to fight. He knew how to fight in terms of an army, terrain, superior manpower, massive maneuver. Okay, I'm getting into my military stuff again. Anyway, dude was very good. Like all military conquests, though, it is fleeting. The Battle of Chalon-sur-Marne, the Romans and the Visigoths. We'll hear more from the Visigoths in just a minute. The Roman army teamed with the Visigoths, a nomadic tribe in Germany, to basically say, that's enough. That's enough. We got to beat this guy. And they did combine forces in that massive battle, Chalon-sur-Marne. 162,000 men died in that battle. And that's to say nothing of the injured and otherwise missing casualties. The king of the Visigoths was actually killed in the battle. Attila was defeated here. He surrendered, survived, and within a year he moved south into Italy. What's in Italy? Rome, the capital of the Western Roman Empire. Pope Leo I managed to talk Attila out of conquering the city of Rome. And he agreed. Again, much like paying that, giving the bully a couple of bucks not to bother you, Attila's reputation was that. He headed back through the Alps, back to where he came from, but at that time he died in his sleep. Ruptured blood vessel is what the book says. Could have been any number of things. His death, oddly enough, occurred on the night of his sixth wedding. Read into that which you will. But the lesson of Attila's life, I think, is certainly that of an incredible military commander and someone who was a fairly capable ruler. But it also points to the very tenuous nature of things you obtain by force. Force only goes so far. People prefer to be reasoned with rather than forced. And anything you obtain under coercion, under force, under violence is fleeting. Attila had two sons. You might have heard of one of them, Genghis Khan. They were not as able rulers as he was. And the Huns almost disappeared into history. Today there's very little physical evidence of the Huns, the empire, this great empire that Attila created. No buildings, capitals, or anything. Some of that was by design. Again, he did not build castles or anything like that. But just as quickly as the Huns conquered half the known world, they were scattered and left really upon the ash heap of history. There's very little existing today that testifies to the fact that the Huns even existed. So, to me, that's the lesson we can learn here. Despite all of your on-earth successes, they are fleeting. They are just things. Piggybacking all this, the attacks from the Huns, they were just one of the many forces that were now working militarily to bring down the Western Roman Empire. The date given for the collapse of the Western Roman Empire was 476. That's when their last truly Roman emperor was deposed. Again, you'll recall it was in 313 that Constantine more or less reunited the empire and ended the persecution of Christians. So within the matter of just 163 years, They went from being the most powerful force on Earth to disbanded. Again, everything you get militarily is fleeting. Like we mentioned before, after Constantine reunited the empire, it divided again, so forth, so on. But if you look at the maps of the Roman Empire, it was basically all of Western Europe, the northern part of Africa, basically everything circling the Mediterranean Sea. Part of that was the breakdown has to be attributed to the enormous size. Again, Diocletian, the one who divided the empire first, he was onto something. It was just too big. And Rome had to start hiring mercenaries as soldiers to keep control in all these areas that they ostensibly controlled. They were made up of what the Romans called barbarians. That means, in Latin, ignorant one. So they were not very highly regarded by their employers, but they needed to have this protection. Well, number one, that costs a lot of money. You got to pay them. So what did they do? They raised taxes. They devalued money. What happens then? Inflation. We've heard it before. It happened again. And inflation brings down the value of everything, and everybody suffers. And when people are suffering economically, they get angry. And they are much, much harder to rule. We spent a few minutes talking about the Huns attacking into the Roman Empire. They were not the only ones. Pretty much at every single corner of the Roman Empire, there was a group of so-called barbarians that were attacking them, that were fighting back. First, there were the Franks, those who were really of German descent. They began leading the Roman army as commanders. By 486, they took northern Gaul from the Romans under King Clovis. This area became so well populated by the Franks that people began calling the area France. And we still do today. Clovis converted, here's another story, Clovis converted to Christianity in 496, and really that rule would shape French culture for years to come. King Clovis and his wife, Clotilde, were the sort of the patron saints of Christianity in France, regarded as that for many years. Meantime, the Goths, another Germanic tribe, were invading several quarters of the Western Empire. They split into two groups. The Visigoths were the Western Goths. The Ostrogoths were the Eastern Goths. The Visigoths were the, if you'll recall, the ones that partnered with Rome to hold off Attila. Because of that, they were offered a small part of the empire. That wasn't enough for them. In 409, they rallied together and stormed Italy, the Italian peninsula. And in the year 410, they did the unthinkable by sacking the city of Rome itself, a city that had not been invaded successfully for 800 years. Again, another big blow to the Western Roman Empire. The third group we'll talk about are the Angles, just like the triangle, Angles. These barbarians began to move in from what's now England in 449. England, really, as we call it today, is designed, it comes from the Old English words Ingla and land, which means land of the Angles. The more you know. They joined up with some of the existing Saxons and Jute tribes there, the Anglo-Saxons, you'll recall. What we call Anglo-Saxons are from the Angles and the Saxons, who banded together and really pushed the Roman Empire, such as it was, out of the British Isles. Fourth group, the hardest blow, were from the Vandals. 455, another one of those Germanic tribes. Yeah, I'm of German descent. We produce a whole lot of mischief makers. The Vandals, of course, today the word vandal has a very specific meaning, to tear something up, and that's exactly what they did. They hit Rome in 455, and for 2 weeks they did nothing more than just loot the place. The attack was a bit of a surprise because they came up from the south. They actually sailed across the Mediterranean. They didn't cross the Alps north of Italy. They came up from the sea and then took it from the south up. Doesn't matter how they came and they destroyed. Thousands of Romans were taken as slaves, just like they had done to others. The population of Rome dropped from 1.5 million to 300,000 in a decade. 80% of the people left Rome. one way or the other. Some of the looting of the Vandals was what we're going to think of as just desserts. Do you remember all the items that the Roman soldiers in 70 A.D. stole from the temple in Jerusalem when they sacked it? Yeah, they still had them on display. Guess who took them? The Vandals. Justice, I don't know, but what goes around comes around, I suppose. Again, the real fall of the Western Roman Empire came in the year 476 when Romulus Augustus was ousted from the throne by Odoacer. It's been labeled the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but there were other things too. It's a word to be said at least about what we now call the moral decline of Rome. Again, that's a much harder one to quantify, but did they get too comfortable, too full of themselves, too convinced of their own immortality? Impossible to say, but certainly there were moral differences in Rome in the 4th century, 5th century A.D. Than there was a few decades before. The fall of the Roman Empire ushered in what we will call, and we'll start picking up next week, the Dark Ages. The entire region dwindled in terms of innovation, very little investment in the arts. When you are in economic and social and military dire straits, you don't have time to produce great art. You don't even have time to educate. You're just trying to survive. And when most of your energy is spent on survival, the arts are not going to thrive. Education is not going to thrive. And for centuries, they did not thrive in most of Europe. Now, as we put the final epitaph on the Roman Empire, good, bad, both, neither, it's up to you. We've certainly witnessed the bad of the Roman Empire, the waves of persecution against Christians, the scattering of the Jews not once but twice. We talked about the attack at Masada, and that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of what happened when Rome conquered a region. But on the other hand, a lot of what we call Western civilization either originated in Rome or was perpetuated by Rome. Many good things, engineering and architecture in the Roman Empire, reached heights never before seen. Roman aqueducts built 2,000 years ago are still used to deliver water. Some of the cobblestone streets that they laid 2,000 years ago are still stepped upon today. The bridges, which brought horses and buggies from one side of waterway to another, now bring tractor trailers across. Lots of tangible evidence of the architectural and engineering advances made in the Roman Empire. More importantly, the idea of rule of law, of a republic system of government, has laid the foundation for what we call representative democracy today. There was a nation state in Athens years before that practiced a form of democracy. The Roman Republic gave way to the empire, but the political foundation that Rome established was very significant in that it saw a role for private citizens to be protected by law. In human history, the private citizen, you're on your own, buddy. But the Roman government began the process of seeing that there is such thing as law, and even the lowliest of person deserves protection that is offered by it. As we work today, let's pray we don't make the same mistakes the Roman Empire did 1,500 years ago. But let's pray that we can perpetuate the good things that came from the Roman Empire. There's good and bad in all things on earth. That's why we are so looking forward to heaven. We get bad stuff on earth. Anyway, we'll talk about this on Monday. Have a great weekend.